Long before the name Shaka echoed across southern Africa, the land that would become known as Zululand was already alive with movement, memory, and meaning. It was not yet an empire, but a group of clans bound by ancestry, cattle, and the spirits of the earth. Zululand lies along the eastern edge of southern Africa, in what is now KwaZulu-Natal. The region was defined by rolling grasslands, fertile river valleys, and a warm coastal climate influenced by the Indian Ocean. The Tugela or Tequila and Mlothes rivers nourished crops and cattle alike. These waterways were more than resources. They were spiritual boundaries and meeting places, shaping settlement patterns and clan territories. The land was communally held, believed to belong not to individuals but to the living, the dead, and the unborn. The ancestors of the Zulu were part of the Nguni-speaking Bantu migrations, which migrated southward over centuries from Central and Eastern Africa. By the 17th and 18th centuries, Nguni groups had settled along the southeastern coast. Among these communities were the Zulu, the Mthethwa, the Ndwandwe, the Kwabe, and the Hlubi. At this time, Zulu did not refer to a nation. The word meant heaven or sky, and the Zulu were a small clan living under the authority and influence of more powerful neighbors. Political life in this period was organized around small chiefdoms rather than centralized states. Authority rested with the chief, the Nkosi, who served as both political leader and spiritual figure, supported by councils of elders who advised on custom, law, and community affairs. Ancestral spirits, Amadlozi, were believed to guide and protect the living, and legitimacy depended as much on spiritual approval as on leadership skill. Power relied less on conquest and more on kinship ties, persuasion, cattle ownership, and alliances created through marriage. Conflicts did occur, but warfare was usually limited in scale, and defeated groups were often absorbed into the victor's community rather than destroyed. The economy of Zululand before Shaka revolved around cattle. Cattle were the foundation of wealth, status, and survival. They were central to bride wealth, ritual sacrifice, and political influence, and ownership of herds determined a family's standing in society. Alongside pastoralism, communities practiced mixed farming, growing sorghum, millet, beans, and pumpkins. Agricultural life followed seasonal cycles, guided by ancestral tradition and close observation of the land and weather. Despite its rural character, Zululand was not isolated from the wider world. Trade networks connected inland communities to the Indian Ocean coast, where African, Arab, and later European traders exchanged ivory, animal skins, and iron goods for beads, cloth, and tools. These early trade routes quietly shaped wealth, competition, and political rivalry long before European colonization intensified in the region. Culturally, society was tightly structured around extended families and clans, with clear roles shaped by age and gender. Respect for elders and obedience to custom were central values. Spiritual life focused on ancestor veneration rather than distant gods. Ancestors were believed to intervene in daily affairs, bringing illness or blessing depending on how the living honored tradition. Diviners and healers interpreted the spiritual world and worked to restore balance. History, values, and identity were preserved through oral tradition, especially praise poetry, songs, and storytelling, ensuring memory endured without written records. By the late 18th century, Zululand was a crowded and competitive political landscape. Powerful neighbors such as the Mthethwa Confederation and the Ndwandwe Kingdom competed for grazing land, cattle, and access to trade routes, while groups like the Kwabe frequently clashed over territory. Population growth and environmental pressure intensified these rivalries, creating a tense and shifting world poised on the edge of transformation. When Shaka was born around 1787, Zululand was still fragmented, rich in culture but divided in power. The Zulu clan itself was minor and politically vulnerable. Few could have imagined that a child born into such circumstances, amid whispers of illegitimacy and exile, would soon reshape this landscape into one of the most formidable kingdoms in African history. Yet the foundation had already been laid. The land, the people, the cattle, and the ancestors had prepared the stage for a transformation that would change southern Africa forever. Imagine a child born to a chief, yet treated as an outcast. A boy mocked so cruelly that he grew up hardened, determined to rise above the shame forced upon him. That boy would become Shaka Zulu, one of the greatest military leaders Africa has ever known. His story is not only about war and conquest, it begins with pain, rejection, and a mother's unshakable love. Shaka was born in 1787, near present-day KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. His father, Senzangakona Kajama, was a Zulu chief. His mother, Nandi, belonged to the Langini clan. Their union was complicated. According to custom, their relationship was not formally recognized, partly because Nandi conceived outside the strict traditions of marriage. This made her position unstable, and from the moment Shaka was born, both mother and child carried the stain of social rejection. The boy was ridiculed with cruel nicknames. One insult called him Shaka, a reference to an intestinal beetle, implying his birth was a mistake, a sickness. The taunt stayed with him for life. Shaka's early life was marked by rejection, humiliation, and relentless struggle, experiences that would shape his character long before he ever commanded an army. His father, Senzangakona, a minor chief of the Zulu clan, took Nandi as a partner but later denied her status and questioned the legitimacy of her child. Under pressure from his own family and elders, Senzangakona rejected Nandi and sent her away, refusing to fully acknowledge Shaka as his heir. This act did more than break a family, it cast Nandi and her son into a life of uncertainty and shame. Nandi returned with her child to her own people, the Langini, hoping for refuge among kin. Instead she found cruelty. The community whispered that her son was a curse, a child born out of improper union. Children mocked Shaka, calling him names, ridiculing his appearance, and reminding him daily that he did not belong. Adults looked on with contempt or indifference, treating Nandi as a woman who had overstepped her place. Food was scarce, kindness scarcer still. Mother and son lived on the margins, tolerated but never embraced. Isolation forced Nandi to become fiercely protective. She raised Shaka with strict discipline, teaching him endurance, self-control, and an unbreakable sense of dignity. She spoke to him constantly about his father's bloodline and reminded him that rejection did not erase his worth. Nandi herself endured humiliation without bowing, confronting insults directly and refusing to be silenced. Her defiance became Shaka's first lesson in leadership. From her, he learned that survival required strength, and respect had to be taken when it was not freely given. As Shaka grew older, the cruelty hardened him. He learned to fight not only with his body but with his will. Herding cattle exposed him to constant bullying, yet it also taught him endurance, alertness, and strategy. Every insult etched itself into his memory. The pain of being unwanted did not break him, it sharpened him. He began to imagine a future where power would silence mockery, where fear would replace scorn. This childhood rejection became the fire that burned at the center of Shaka's identity. It fueled an intense drive to prove himself, to rise above every man who had dismissed him and every community that had pushed him aside. He did not forget the laughter or the hunger, nor the nights when his mother stood alone against a hostile world. In his heart grew a vow that one day, those who had treated him as nothing would be forced to recognize his strength. The boy who was mocked and cast out would become a man before whom kings would bow. As a young man, Shaka's life took a decisive turn when he found refuge among the Mthethwa people, a powerful and forward-thinking community led by Chief Dingiswayo. Unlike the places of his childhood, the Mthethwa offered structure, opportunity, and, for the first time, a chance to be judged by ability rather than by birth. Dingiswayo was known for welcoming outsiders and uniting different groups under his leadership. And within this environment, Shaka was no longer just a rejected child but a young warrior in the making. Shaka was enrolled into the Mthethwa military regiments, where discipline, obedience, and endurance were rigorously enforced. Life in the regiments was harsh. Young men were drilled relentlessly, marched long distances barefoot, and trained to withstand pain, hunger, and fatigue without complaint. Many struggled under these conditions, but Shaka thrived. His tall, powerful build and natural athleticism quickly drew attention, yet it was his intensity and focus that truly set him apart. He listened more than he spoke, observed carefully, and absorbed every lesson with purpose. Under Dingiswayo's command, Shaka witnessed warfare on a scale larger than the scattered skirmishes of his youth. He saw how armies were organized, how loyalty was cultivated, and how leadership could inspire unity among diverse clans. But he also noticed the weaknesses in the traditional methods of fighting. Battles often began with warriors standing apart, hurling light-throwing spears at one another from a distance. These encounters could drag on for hours, exhausting men without decisive results. Victory often depended on chance rather than skill or strategy, and retreat was common once a few men fell. Shaka questioned this approach. He recognized that distance fighting wasted energy and allowed fear to linger. Watching these engagements, he began to imagine a different kind of warfare. One that demanded close contact, absolute discipline, and unwavering courage. He believed that a warrior trained to stand firm, advance together, and fight at close range could break an enemy's spirit quickly and completely. To Shaka, war was not a ritual display of bravery. It was a test of organization, endurance, and resolve. He began to experiment during training, favoring strength, speed, and formation over individual display. He pushed himself harder than others, running farther, training longer, and enduring pain without retreat. His peers noticed his determination, and some feared it. Others followed him. Slowly, his reputation grew not just as a fearless fighter, but as someone who thought differently, someone who saw order where others accepted chaos. Within the Mthethwa regiments, Shaka's natural leadership emerged. He understood how to motivate men who, like himself, had known hardship and rejection. He led from the front, shared their suffering, and demanded the same discipline from himself that he demanded from others. Dingiswayo took notice of this young warrior who combined physical power with sharp intelligence. In Shaka, he saw not only a fighter but a commander, someone capable of reshaping the very nature of war. These years with the Mthethwa were formative. They gave Shaka protection, training, and a stage on which his ideas could take shape. Away from the wounds of his childhood, his ambition hardened into purpose. The boy once driven by pain was becoming a man driven by vision, preparing to transform not only how wars were fought, but how power itself was claimed. When Shaka's father, Chief Senzangakona, died in 1816, the balance of power within the small Zulu clan shifted overnight. Leadership passed not to Shaka, but to his half-brother Sigujana, a young and politically weak figure who lacked broad support. For Shaka, this moment was more than a family dispute, it was the opening he had waited for all his life. Years of rejection, discipline, and military training had prepared him for this single opportunity. With the backing of Chief Dingiswayo and the experienced Mthethwa forces, Shaka moved swiftly. The challenge to Sigujana was decisive and ruthless. In keeping with the brutal realities of succession politics at the time, Sigujana was killed, eliminating any rival claim to leadership. Shaka returned to his ancestral land not as an outcast or minor warrior, but as the undisputed chief of the Zulu. At this moment, the Zulu were still a small and relatively insignificant clan, but that was about to change. Once in power, Shaka wasted no time reshaping his people. He believed survival depended on strength, unity, and absolute discipline. One of his first and most famous innovations was the redesign of the spear. The traditional long throwing spear was replaced with the ikwa, a short, heavy stabbing weapon with a broad blade. Its name echoed the sound it made when pulled from a body. Shaka intended combat to be close, personal, and final. Warriors were trained to close the distance quickly, shield to shield, and kill decisively. Training under Shaka was relentless. Warriors were hardened physically and mentally through constant drilling. They ran long distances barefoot over sharp stones and thorny ground until their feet became tough as leather. Retreat was punished severely and fear was not tolerated. Endurance, obedience, and cohesion mattered more than individual bravery. Shaka demanded total loyalty, and in return he created a sense of shared identity stronger than clan ties. He reorganized the army into age-based regiments known as impi, each housed in military settlements and bound by strict codes of discipline. These regiments owed allegiance directly to Shaka, not to local chiefs, effectively breaking older loyalties and centralizing power in his hands. Military service became the foundation of citizenship, masculinity, and honor within Zulu society. Shaka's most devastating contribution to warfare was his tactical genius. He perfected the bullhorn formation, a maneuver that turned battles into swift annihilations. The chest of seasoned warriors engaged the enemy head-on, locking them in place. The horns, made up of faster and younger fighters, swept around the flanks to encircle the opposition. Meanwhile, the loins, a reserve force held back and rested, delivered the final crushing assault. Escape was nearly impossible. What had once been ritualized skirmishes became calculated, overwhelming attacks. With these methods, Shaka transformed the Zulu from a minor clan into a disciplined war machine. Neighboring groups were defeated one after another. Some were destroyed, but many were absorbed into the Zulu kingdom, their young men drafted into the impi and their leaders subordinated to Shaka's authority. This policy rapidly increased Zulu manpower and influence while spreading fear throughout the region. Within a few years, the Zulu kingdom expanded dramatically, dominating much of what is now KwaZulu-Natal. Its influence stretched from the Tugela River in the south to the Pongola River in the north. Shaka ruled through a mixture of reward and terror, generosity and brutality. Loyalty brought protection and status. Disobedience brought death. Under his command, the Zulu became the most feared military power in southern Africa. Yet this expansion unleashed consequences far beyond Zululand. Shaka's campaigns triggered widespread upheaval across the region, setting off a chain reaction of warfare, displacement, and survival struggles known as the mfecane, meaning the crushing. Entire communities fled before Zulu armies, clashing with other groups as they searched for safety. Some formed new kingdoms, others were destroyed, and many were absorbed into stronger powers. Southern Africa was reshaped demographically, politically, and militarily. By the height of his power, Shaka was no longer merely a chief, he was a force that altered the course of history. His rise from rejected child to supreme ruler transformed not only the Zulu people, but the entire region, leaving a legacy of brilliance, brutality, and profound change that would echo long after his death. In 1824, at the height of his power, Shaka came into contact with a new and unfamiliar force along the coast. British traders arrived at Port Natal, the settlement that would later become the city of Durban. These men, among them figures such as Henry Francis Finn and Nathaniel Isaacs, were drawn by reports of ivory, cattle, and a powerful inland king. Shaka received them cautiously but with curiosity. He was not intimidated by their strange clothes, ships, or weapons. Instead, he treated them as potential allies and useful intermediaries. Shaka allowed trade to take place, exchanging ivory and cattle for metal goods, beads, and a limited number of firearms. He observed European weapons closely but remained unimpressed by their reliability and slow rate of fire compared to the speed and discipline of his impi. Firearms, he believed, could supplement power but not replace the strength of trained warriors fighting in formation. His empire rested firmly on African innovation, organization, and obedience, not dependence on foreign technology. Even as Europeans stepped onto his shores, Shaka remained master of his world. Despite his fearsome reputation, those closest to Shaka knew another side of him, a deeply emotional man shaped by early trauma. At the center of his private world stood his mother, Nandi. She had endured rejection, ridicule, hunger, and exile to protect him, and Shaka's devotion to her was absolute. He ensured she lived in honor, surrounded by servants and protection, and he sought her counsel even as king. She was the one person before whom he softened. In 1827, Nandi fell gravely ill. When she died, Shaka was shattered. The loss reopened every wound of his childhood, and his grief consumed him entirely. Unable to separate personal sorrow from royal authority, he imposed a period of mourning so severe it defied reason. He declared that no crops were to be planted, no milk consumed, and no celebrations held. Sexual relations were forbidden, and pregnant women and newborns were reportedly killed, as Shaka believed no one had the right to bring life into the world while he mourned the woman who gave him life. Punishments for disobedience were brutal and immediate. Executions became common, and famine followed as agricultural cycles were disrupted. Thousands suffered and died, not at the hands of foreign enemies, but under the weight of their king's grief. What had once been awe-inspired loyalty began to curdle into terror. Warriors whispered in the shadows. Chiefs who had once praised Shaka's genius began to resent his cruelty and unpredictability. By 1828, Shaka's mental state had grown increasingly unstable. He became deeply suspicious, seeing betrayal in minor mistakes and questioning the loyalty of even his closest companions. His demands grew harsher, his punishments more extreme. Trust evaporated from the royal court. Those who remained near him did so out of fear rather than devotion. Among those most threatened by Shaka's behavior were his half-brothers, Dingane and Mlangana. Once protected by Shaka and positioned close to power, they now feared that his paranoia would eventually turn on them. In a kingdom where succession was often settled by blood, survival demanded action. Quietly, they began to conspire with discontented nobles and trusted attendants, weaving a plot to remove the king before he destroyed them all. On a cool day in September 1828, at Kwazulu-Natal, the royal settlement near present-day Stanger, Shaka walked within the Great Kraal, discussing state matters with Mfecane, one of his most trusted advisors. Little did he know that Mbofa had already chosen betrayal over loyalty. He was part of the conspiracy, waiting for the moment when the king would be most vulnerable. The empire that Shaka had forged through iron discipline and fear now stood on the edge of collapse, and the final act of his life was about to unfold. Accounts tell us that on that fateful day, Dingane and Mlangana approached Shaka under the guise of routine business, their spears carefully concealed beneath their cloaks. The royal kraal, usually a place of order and ceremony, was tense with quiet dread. Shaka, unaware of the betrayal unfolding around him, spoke of military plans and state affairs, his voice commanding, calm, and familiar. It was in this moment of apparent normalcy that Mbofa, the trusted advisor whose counsel Shaka had relied upon for years, struck first. With a swift, precise motion, he plunged a spear deep into Shaka's side. The king staggered backward, eyes wide with shock and pain, his voice breaking into a cry of disbelief that echoed across the courtyard. Before Shaka could recover, his own brothers, Dingane and Mlengana, joined the attack. One after another, their spears found their mark. There was no time for defense, no chance for strategy, no battlefield advantage. The man who had once toppled enemies with terrifying precision now faced the final betrayal in the quiet center of his own kingdom. The great warrior who had never known defeat in combat fell not to an invading army, but to the hands of those who shared his blood. Some accounts preserve his last words, spoken through pain and astonishment. "Are you stabbing me, brothers? You kill me thinking you will rule, but you are wrong. You will be ruled by others." Whether spoken aloud or whispered in the moment, they carry the weight of prophecy, a warning that the legacy of power is never simple, and that ambition unchecked by respect can bring ruin even to family. Shaka's body was hurriedly buried in a grain pit, its location deliberately kept secret to prevent veneration or rebellion. Even in death he remained a figure of fear. Those who had plotted his demise knew that any rallying of his loyal followers could result in their own deaths, for the shadow of Shaka's power still loomed over the Zulu heartland. Although Shaka's reign lasted only about 14 years, from 1816 to 1828, he was aged 41 when he died. The magnitude of his achievements was seen and felt. In that time he had forged the Zulu kingdom from scattered clans, reshaped the art of African warfare with unprecedented innovations, and instilled discipline and organization that transformed his people into a feared and respected power across southern Africa. His legacy extends beyond battles and conquest. It endures in culture, oral tradition, and collective memory. Shaka's story is, above all, one of resilience. He rose from rejection, humiliation, and exile. He was shaped by a mother's unyielding courage and a childhood of adversity. He became a warrior who carved an empire out of the very circumstances meant to crush him. His life demonstrates the power of vision, discipline, and determination, as well as the peril of absolute authority and isolation. Today, the land of KwaZulu-Natal, where rivers, valleys, and plains once bore witness to his campaigns, carries the name of his people and echoes his enduring influence. Shaka's vision, his strength, and his indelible mark on history continue to inspire awe, nearly 2 centuries after the spear first found its mark, reminding the world of a man who transformed rejection into empire and adversity into legend. Shaka was called Inkosi because the term is a Zulu word meaning chief, king, or leader. In Zulu society, an Inkosi is not just a political ruler. The title carries authority over a clan or community, responsibility for justice, military command, and the welfare of the people. It is both a social and spiritual role, linking the leader to ancestors who are believed to guide and protect the living. When Shaka became the head of the Zulu clan after defeating his half-brother Sigujana, he inherited not just the position of political leadership but the responsibilities of an Inkosi. This meant he was expected to lead his people in war and defend the clan from enemies, to enforce laws and customs within the community, act as a mediator in disputes between families or other clans, maintain spiritual and ancestral connections, performing rituals or sacrifices to honor the ancestors and ensure the clan's well-being. But in Shaka's case, being Inkosi went beyond traditional expectations. He centralized power in his hands, transformed the Zulu into a disciplined military state, and expanded their territory. His title, therefore, reflected not only his position as a clan chief but also the immense authority and influence he wielded over all aspects of Zulu society. Most Nkosi were respected but limited to small territories and shared power with elders. Shaka, however, became Nkosi Enkulu, the great chief, a leader like no other. He commanded the entire Zulu nation, created disciplined armies, expanded their lands, and held ultimate authority over every warrior, clan, and village. He was not just a chief. He was the supreme ruler who turned a small clan into a mighty kingdom, feared and respected across southern Africa.